Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our VPK Provider Kindergarten Readiness Rate Overview webinar. We thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have a lot of folks on the line, which is fabulous. Right now we have over 400 folks who are logged in, which we're very excited to have the opportunity to share this information with you this afternoon. Before we jump in, I would like to share some exciting news. There was a press release yesterday from Governor DeSantis' office sharing that in his released proposed budget to the legislature, there is a proposed increase of $12.8 million for the VPK program, and that will be the highest BSA since 2011 and 12. And that will be a total of $415 million proposed in the budget for next year. So we're excited to hear that announcement, and that would equate to about a $50 per child increase, which we're again happy that it's on that upward trajectory. So we're hopeful that that will be approved. So as we begin our webinar, we just wanted to share with you that because we have so many participants, which again is wonderful, but we may not be able to answer all of your individual questions. And so please know that we are recording this webinar, and we will have record of all of the questions asked. And we're going to be putting the questions together in a Q&A document that will be posted on our Office of Early Learning website, as well as the PowerPoint that you'll be seeing today. That PowerPoint will also be posted on our OEL website. And I'll be sending you an email when that information is posted over the next day or two, so that you will have access to this PowerPoint after the webinar has concluded, as well as the recording. Okay. I'd like to introduce Gary Savage. I'm the Director of VPK Accountability, and he's going to be walking us through this afternoon with information regarding the readiness rate. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gary.
Thank you, Melinda. Okay, so we've put together a relatively simple presentation here, and what our goal is to make sure VPK providers have a better understanding of how the readiness rate will be calculated this year and some of the activities revolving around that. So if we can move to the agenda, just one slide, there we go, back one. Okay, so we just have a short agenda. We're going to review the changes to the rule, the 6M-8.601, which is the VPK Provider Kindergarten Readiness Rate Rule. We're going to go through some examples where what we're going to do is show you how the rate was calculated in 17-18, the rates that we released earlier this spring. And we're going to then take those same examples for each of them, and we're going to go through and show through example how the readiness rate would be calculated using the learning gains reflected from the change made to the state board rule. So then we're going to talk a little bit about timelines and notifications for VPK providers as the upcoming readiness rate season starts. And then we will have time for some questions. As Melinda said, there are so many people on. We really will not, we know we won't be able to answer all questions. And I'd encourage you that if you do have a question that you think would be for the good of the all, that everybody would benefit from the answer, we don't really want to try to get into how many hypothetical situations we can answer or situations that are not related to what the specific rule that we're talking about here. But at any rate, we will try to answer those that we think would benefit everybody, but all of them, as Melinda said, will be captured. We'll be putting together what we hope is not a 50-page frequently asked questions document or a Q&A, and get that out to folks as soon as it's been put together. Okay, so we're going to move to the next slide. Okay, so we just wanted to provide for your reference. This is the statutory reference from section 102.67 of the Florida statutes that guides the readiness rate process, that says our office shall annually adopt procedures for the readiness rate. And the link that's provided there at the bottom is really just a link to our website where you can go and look at all of the regulations, whether or not they're the statutes or the rules. That link will get you to those. And if you're a VPK provider, of course, these are the things that when you sign that VPK contract obligate you the things you're going to do. So at any rate, it's really just good information and good as a provider to be aware of the requirements of the VPK program and avoid those surprises. So we're going to move one slide. And so in August, I think it was August 20th or so of this year, the State Board of Education adopted changes to Rule 6M-8.601 of the Florida Administrative Code. And the real thrust of that change was to include the learning gains in the calculation of each provider's readiness rate. Those learning gains, as adopted, may contribute up to 10 points towards what will be the final readiness rate for the 18-19 VPK program year. It also describes in the rule what, at the child level, it means to have made learning gains. And as I'm sure all providers know, there are 4 domains included in the Florida VPK assessment. That's the assessment that you all give during the VPK program year to your students. And from that assessment, there are 4 domains, and children will have to make learning gains in each of the 4 domains in order to have said for that individual child to have made gains for the year. And just kind of based on some of the follow-up we had, just to be very clear, what that means is you have to, or a child, when there are scores between the first assessment point, the AP1, and the last assessment point, AP3, in each of the domains, what we'll be looking for is a score that is in a higher scoring category than from the first assessment period to the third assessment period. Also, if a child maintains the highest level, so if they're in that exceeding expectations category and they remain at exceeding, they will get credit for having made learning gains. But if they're in the lowest and they go to the middle category, that will be a learning gain. If they're in the middle and they go to the highest, that will be a learning gain. And like kind of to be redundant, if they're in the lowest category and they go all the way to the top category, that also would be considered a learning gain in that domain. So this year, the readiness rate will be a combination of the percent of children that were ready on Flickers, and Flickers is the Florida Kindergarten Readiness Screener, that assessment we've been doing for many years now. So it's going to be a combination of the percentage of children that are ready on learning on Flickers and the learning gains shown on the Florida VPK assessment. At the bottom of the page on your screen, we have shown that this is actually lifted exactly from the rule itself. That's the calculation. So we'll be taking the percent of children ready on kindergarten screening. We'll be adding the percent of children making learning gains times 0.1. And those two things together will equal the provider kindergarten readiness rate for this year. So that's what we're going to be walking through the examples through today. So we're going to turn the page, or turn the slide as it were. So what you have in front of you is just an example from the 17-18 readiness rates of how we calculated last year's rates. And in this example, you'll see this picture off to the right that's, we call it a card on the readiness rate website that shows for the 2018 year, this example provider, this is their final readiness rate. The information that's shown in the card, you can be expanded when somebody clicks View Report, and then it shows some of the information that's listed in the picture across the bottom. But in this example, there were 37 children that this provider served. 30 of those children met substantial completion, meaning that they attended at least 70% of the hours of the VPK program. Of the 37, 32 were screened on Flickers. So we have some different numbers there, and we have to figure out which kids both met substantial completion and were screened on Flickers. And you'll see in the bullets to the left side of the page that there are 28 children in the readiness rate. That means for this example, 28 of the total 37 children were both met substantial completion and were screened on Flickers. So then we want to know of the children that were included in the rate, of those 28 children, how many of them scored ready for kindergarten according to Flickers. So in this example, 13 of the 28 children that are included in the rates were ready on flickers. So 13 divided by 28 is 46. 46 was their final readiness rate last year in this example. So it's really pretty simple. We just have to figure out which kids are included in the rate by having met completion and having a flicker score, and then we had to figure out of those kids that were included, what percentage of them scored 500 or higher on the Florida Kindergarten Readiness Screener. And when we say the Florida Kindergarten Readiness Screener, many of you will be thinking of the STAR Early Literacy. The Florida Kindergarten Readiness Screener, or Flickers, is the umbrella assessment for the state. The assessment currently being used, that's been used for 3 years now, is the STAR Early Literacy, and that's the assessment that children are needing a score of 500 or higher in order to be considered ready for kindergarten. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide. Okay, so what we've done is we've just taken the exact same example we walked through a moment ago, but now we're going to take the same numbers and we're going to include learning gains in it. So you have the same 37 children that were served, you have the same 28 children that were completers of a valid screening score that were included in the rate, you have the same 13 students that scored ready, so that's our 36%. But now we've added a new element here. And what we've done is we've said in this example, they had 28 children that were in their calculation, and we're going to say that 28 of those children all made gains. That means 100% of their kids that were included in the readiness rate made gains. And that's going to give them a final readiness rate of 56. So the calculation, again, is a really pretty simple thing. We found out the percentage of children ready, just like we did on the previous slide, 13 divided by 28. That gave us our 46. That was their score last year, but this year it's only one piece of the score. Then we're going to do the addition of learning gains, and we said 100% of these kids made learning gains on the VPK assessment. So then we're going to take 100, we're going to multiply it times 0.1, and that's going to give us 10. So in this case, this provider, in this example, would have a final readiness rate of 56. The 46 from the percent of children that were ready, and we're going to add the learning gains element of 10 points being added to the readiness rate, giving us a final readiness rate of 56 in this example. Okay, so we're going to go to our second example. So it's really very much the same information in that we have an example provider that had a readiness rate of 55 last year. They served 38 children. 30 of those children met substantial completion. 35 were screened on flickers. And we ended up with 29 children in the rate. So that means all of their children that met substantial completion except for one child were included in the rate, because you have to find those kids that have both. So we had 29 children in the rate. We go and look at their scores for flickers. This is again last year. 16 of the 29 children scored 500 or higher on flickers. So 16 divided by 29 equals 55 or 55%. So their final readiness rate last year was a 55. So now we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to take that example and just be a little redundant here. 38 children were served, 29 children in the readiness rate, 16 of the children scored ready. That's our 55% from our previous slide. And however, what we've done with this example, we've said 20 children made gains. So that's 20 children out of 29 that were in the readiness rate, or 69% of them, the children made gains. So we'll do a little rounding, and we will get a final readiness rate of 62. So the calculation is 16 divided by 29 is our 55. That's the percentage of children who are ready. We're going to add the learning gains element in. So we're going to have 69% times 0.1 is 6.9. We're going to round that up to 7. And we're going to add our 55% ready and our 7 points from the learning gains. And this provider's final readiness rate would be a 62. So what you can see is historically, had this been applied last year, a provider who scored a 55 last year, but had 69% of their kids make gains on the learning, on the VPK assessment administered in VPK, would have ended up with a final score of 62 using the methodology that we'll be using this coming year. So in this case, you would have a provider that previously would have had a rate that fell below the standard, below that 60 that everybody's shooting for, and they would have in fact earned a 62 using the learning gains as part of their readiness rate calculation. Okay, we're going to pause for just a second and look at our question box. Okay, we're going to pick up a few points from the questions. And first off, we want to say that in the readiness rate rule, and we gave you that link up front that you can go read the rule, it clearly describes who is in the readiness rate calculation. And for our purposes, and according to the rule, the way that we determine whether a child is included or not included in the readiness rate is if they met 70% of the program and they were screened on the Florida Kindergarten Readiness Screener. It will only be that group of children that we'll be looking at for the calculation. So there will be children who made gains, but they either didn't complete the program or perhaps their family moved to Georgia before they got to kindergarten. Those children will not be included in the readiness rate. So there are a number of iterations that could happen, but the very basic thing is you've got to be included in you have to have 70% of the hours in a single provider, and you have to have a score on the kindergarten screening tool. We also saw a question here, and we'll kind of just go over it one more time, is that in order for children to be considered to have made learning gains, so we have 4 domains on the VPK assessment. The child will have to, between AP1 and AP3, so between the pre-test and the post-test, they will have had to move from one scoring category to a higher one, or have maintained scoring in the highest category from the beginning to the end. So if that child is below expectations, they're at least going to have to get to meeting expectations before we consider at the child level of whether or not that child made gains in that domain. And then we'll look, did they make learning gains in all 4 domains? Okay, so we're going to go on to the next example. Okay, and this is a real simple calculation because in the example here we have 20 children who were served. 12 of those children met substantial completion, and 17 of them were screened on flickers. So what they end up with in this example, between those that met substantial completion, there were 10 that met substantial completion and were screened on flickers. So they have 10 out of 20, and then in this example that we're providing, 5 of those children scored 500 or higher on flickers. So their rate as it was calculated last year would have been a 50. 5 divided by 10 would be half their children. 50 was their final readiness rate from last year in this example. So if we turn to the next slide, so what we've done is we have our 20 children served. Again, 10 of them are in the readiness rate, completers of a valid screening score. 5 of the children were ready. That's 50%. That was the rate last year. And now if we take the learning gains, and we've in this example said that all 10 children had learning gains, so they're going to get 100%. So in this example, you would have someone who originally would have had by the percent of children ready for kindergarten, would have had a 50 with the addition of learning gains. We said 100% times 0.1, or they're going to get the full 10 points for learning gains. So in this example, a provider that previously would have scored a 50, we're going to add 10 points for the learning gains, and their final score would be a 60. So this example shows you the maximum number of points that a provider who only scored 50 in the previous calculation would have achieved 60. And of course, again, that's that magic number that all providers are looking to at least make a 60. Okay, we're going to pause again and look at our question box. Just 1 second. Okay, in reviewing the questions, we'll provide a couple of clarifications. We are only looking at the pre and post assessment on the VPK assessment administered during VPK, so that's AP1 and AP3. AP2 is not considered part of the learning gains, and as most folks know, that the AP2 is optional except for those providers on probation who are on staff development plan. So the pre-test and the post-test, the AP1 and the AP3, are the ones that are required of VPK providers by statute. And we had a couple of questions concerning about who's included. We do know that our state has children with disabilities, and we also know we have many children that are speakers of other languages. We do not exclude or specifically exclude any of those children from the calculation if they have all of the necessary data elements. So now there may be children that when they got to kindergarten, they determined that screening was not appropriate for them, and they did not offer the screening, the flickers, to those children. In those cases, we would not have a score, and therefore we would not have that child included in the readiness rate. But on the whole, all children that are screened and we have a valid screening score for them, and they met completion, and we have those two records tied up next to each other, those are going to be the kids that are included in the readiness rate. Okay. So we're going to move to the next slide. So we just wanted to go over our very general timelines. We don't have a lot of hard dates set down right now, but you can see here we are in November, and we are expecting all of the VPK enrollment data from last year to be available, and we're expecting the kindergarten screening from DOE, from the administration that happens, the vast majority of it in the public schools, to be available during the month of November. We are expecting to release the preliminary readiness rates in mid-December, and we don't have an exact date yet, but we're working towards getting these scores out there just as soon as we can. During that, then once that begins in mid-December until late January, we will have the VPK provider verification and dispute process. By rule, that is a 21-day process that providers have to do their verification and submit any disputes they might have. We recognize that there's a pretty good size holiday occurring during that time, so we will make sure that we are generous enough and that we have provided plenty of time for providers to get in there, do their verification, look at their data, recognizing that we have a holiday thrown in there. The ELC review period is a 10-day period, and we will make sure that early learning coalitions have plenty of time to review the data once the providers have done their verification and submitted that. You'll also see the last line on this slide says release of the final 2018-19 VPK readiness rates, and we are still including that in late January. So our leadership has asked us to make sure that we have readiness rates out as soon as possible. And right now our target date would have us publishing the final readiness rates before the end of January. We're going to go to the next slide. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about the notifications that we'll be sending out. We kind of have two classes of providers in terms of the readiness rate site. We've got those folks that have had a readiness rate before and have a profile set up in the readiness rate website, and then we have providers that are new, that this would be the first year they are ever receiving a readiness rate. For those new providers, they will be receiving an individual letter from the Office of Early Learning that provides them with all of the information that they need to be able to access the website, and instructions for accessing the site, as well as instructions about verification and the dispute process. So that will be a physical letter that goes to new providers that we do not have a record as having received a previous readiness rate. We will also send out email notification for existing and new providers that notifies them when the preliminary readiness rates have been posted, and notification of updated timelines. At that point that we release the readiness rate, we will have things that more look like dates on a calendar to be able to share. And of course, that will also include information about the verification of children and the dispute process for providers. So that there's two things to be looking out for. If you've never received a readiness rate before and you're a new provider, you're going to be looking for your provider letter to come to you in the mail, and everyone should be looking for email notification from us. And again, as we said on the slide before that, we are talking about in the mid-December timeframe. We're going to go to the next slide. So for providers, there really is not a lot of that you can be doing right now. You do want to make sure you know through your enrollment data for last year where you go find the number of hours that each child attended on the information you'll be verifying. And for our existing providers that have a profile and already have received a readiness rate, you'll want to go in starting on around December 1st, and go ahead and make sure that you are able to log into the website and get to your secure provider account area of the website. We will have a little bit of change this year, as most folks are familiar with vpk.fldoe.org, and this has been the readiness rate website for many years now. We will have a new URL that is vpkrates.floridaearlylearning.com. Both of those, if somebody types in those addresses, are going to take them to the same place. So if you go to the old site, it's just going to redirect you to the new site. Again, as a reminder, new providers won't be able to do this until they have received their letter from the Office of Early Learning about how to access their the website for the readiness rate website, or access the site. Okay, why don't we go ahead and stop here and see if we have, let's check over to our question box. So give us just one moment, please. Okay, a couple of follow-ups from looking at the question. Somebody had a question, and this is nothing new at all, but in order to receive a readiness rate, a provider must have 4 children who met substantial completion. That means completed at least 70% of the program and were screened on the Florida Kindergarten Readiness Screener. So you must have 4 children that met that. If it's less than 4, then we always publish some sort of a text that says, the provider did not have enough children to calculate a readiness rate who were screened, or did not have enough children participate in order to calculate a readiness rate for that provider. So in those instances, they don't get a readiness rate. We also had a question about kids that arrive late in a program. The instructions for the VPK assessment are that you administer during the first 30 days of the VPK program. So children that are administered after the 30 days of the VPK program, you would not be assessing those children, and they would not be available for learning gains for that provider. Okay, we're going to go on to the next slide. Okay, so here at the Office of Early Learning, we do have some pretty lofty goals for ourselves this year. We've always had the goal of having very accurate data. We try to make sure that every child that we can physically match to, and that we have the right match to the right children, and we will continue that. So we expect to have the most accurate data. We do have some new things this year that hopefully will increase our match rate and give us even a little bit more accurate picture than we've had in the past. We're automating some of our processes up here. As we already alluded to when we talked about schedule, we will have faster turnaround on data and the readiness rates. And hopefully, like I said, our plan right now is to have the final readiness rates out by the end of January. And in order to do that, we will have to do all of the hand matching. We will also have to resolve all of the disputes submitted by providers. And we want to stop and talk a little bit about the role of disputes. So the dispute form that is posted on the website once the preliminary rates go up is for providers to tell us about either issues or things that they believe may be an error that would affect their readiness rates. So we know we will have providers that score 3 points from the cut point, and if they have some information that would help us improve their data, that's the purpose of those disputes, to dispute the number of children included. Maybe you see when you look through your data that there's a child that you served that you don't see on the list. That's something you need to tell us about through the verification process. Likewise, it's possible we would have a child that's listed in your program that didn't belong to you. That would be where you want to use the dispute form to tell us about those circumstances that you think have an impact on your readiness rate and provide us that evidence. The dispute form in itself, because you have to log in to utilize the form, and we have to log in on our end to be able to see what you've typed into it, is a secure way for you to tell us about individual children. So if a provider wanted to tell us that we have a little girl named Susie, and her date of birth is such and such, and she attended our program, and we know that she is going to ABC Elementary down the road, and we would like you to see if you can find that child's record, because it's missing from our readiness rate. The dispute form is a secure way for you to tell us those kinds of things. We do not want children's names and information to be emailed to our offices, so we provide the dispute form in a secure way so that you can provide us with that individual child information to help us look for children that are not matched or to clear up any issues we might have. Okay, we're going to move to the next slide. Okay, so this slide is provided because this is really a good resource for providers. So at the top of the page up there, you can see that this is floridaearlylearning.com. And if you do one single click, you click on the topic for VPK, this is the page that will be in front of you. I think you have to scroll down a little to get to it, but this is the provider resource page. There's a whole section specifically designed for providers. And you'll see there's various topics there. On the right side, it also has a place where there is a link to the standards website. So all from one page, you can get over to the standards website, We also have circled on the right side where it says regulations. This is the link we provided earlier in the presentation. That is where all of the statutes and rules can be found that apply to VPK providers. We will be posting this presentation as long as the frequently asked questions, and underneath that provider topic you'll see, I guess it's about 6 down, I'm counting across the room, where it says assessments and flickers, that we believe that that's where we will put this website or this presentation, and we will put the PowerPoint that went with it. So we'll be posting things in that area. That's our plan right now, in order to make the presentation we gave today available to you all, and the recording of it available to folks that were not able to get online. Okay. So we're going to turn one more slide, and we're going to take a second and go over to the question box and see if there's anything else that came in. Again, we're going to read all the questions that were submitted. We're just kind of looking for those that we think would be for the help out everyone that's on the phone. So we're going to pause for just a second while we look at those questions one final time. Okay, 2 notes from the questions. Somebody asked a question about whether or not if there's name changes to children. That happens every year. We always have a couple of kids that somewhere over the summer got adopted or experienced a name change through marriage. And if the provider is aware that there was a name change, that is certainly something we would want to know in the dispute form, so that we can try to locate that child's record, which would be under a different name once they went on to kindergarten. We also wanted to, again, encourage folks to go to the Readiness Rate website and make sure that they can log in to it. And there is a feature on there, so if you go to the website, and because we're doing some changes, it may be that if your computer was remembering your password for you and you don't remember it, that you have to use that forgot password function to say, hey, I forgot my password, and by entering your provider ID for existing providers, they're able to recover that information. So you can go to vpk.fldoe.org, just like you've always gone to. It's going to redirect you to the new URL that we gave early in the presentation, which is vpkrates.floridaearlylearning.com, and that's the new website. Both of those, whichever one you type, it's going to get you to the same place. But again, if you're relying on your computer to remember your password, you may have to use that forgot password function in order to access the site. But if you go ahead somewhere in the next few weeks of making sure you have access, you can log in. That way, when we release the preliminary readiness rates, you won't be one of the hundreds and hundreds of people calling our office trying to get somebody to help them access the site. And we will be glad to help folks, but we know when that phone lights up that there's only so many of us, and there's a whole bunch of you all. So at any rate, we kind of have scanned the questions over there. We're going to wrap up the call for today. We want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen in. We hope this is helpful information to you. Be looking for the email notification of when we're going to post this, so that folks that want to go review the information can see it again. And again, thank you for what you do each day for Florida's earliest learners. We do appreciate it. Thank you.